I knew Mary O'Connor would be here because as soon as I brought up the name Ann Tyler, I know she got excited. All right, it is 7 o'clock, and you know I like to start on time and promptly. So we are on Zoom. We're also live on Facebook and on YouTube. Tonight is the first night of our spring book study. You know, we're going to bring some Bible into it too, of course, because that's what you get when you sign up for a church book study. But the book we're studying is St. Maybe by Ann Tyler. Some of you might have it on Kindle, some of you might have a hard copy, but hopefully all of you have a copy. As I said just a couple of minutes ago, if you don't have a copy yet, please don't worry about it. You're still welcome to join us, and I think you'll still enjoy it. But do try and get one if you haven't gotten one already. If you have not yet started the book, also don't worry. I was explaining that we're going to take the first couple of chapters anyway, very, very slowly, with a little bit of a recap at the beginning of each class so everybody knows where we are. I don't know how you guys read. I know that when I start reading a book that I like, I will be the one that stays up until 2 o'clock in the morning to finish it because I just can't wait to see how it's going to turn out. So if we could start with prayer, we will do that. And we'll get started now. And if people come in a little bit late, that's fine too. But in the meantime, let's start with prayer. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Almighty God, our Heavenly Father, who sets the solitary in families, we commend to your continual care the homes in which your people dwell. Put far from them, we beseech you, every root of bitterness, the desire of vainglory, and the pride of life. Fill them with faith, virtue, knowledge, temperance, patience, godliness. Knit together in constant affection those who in holy wedlock have been made one flesh. Turn the hearts of the parents to the children, and the hearts of the children to the parents, and so enkindle fervent charity among us all, that we may evermore be kindly affectioned one to another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. And that, of course, is from our Book of Common Prayer. That is the prayer for families, which is a uniquely valuable prayer for not only this book by Ann Tyler, but I believe for all of her books. Most of what she writes, in fact, I don't know that I've ever read anything by Ann Tyler that was not dealing intimately with what families are really like. And that's one of the things that I love about her. I think I've read everything she's ever written, and I've read a lot of what she's written more than once. So I'm very excited about this book in particular. I read it not long after I joined the church and was just blown away by it. It's one of those books that I feel like I have to read every year or couple of years or so. And it's another one where I find something new every time. So we will start with chapter 1. Which is a good place to start right in the beginning. Let me, just so I know how we should be moving through this, who all has read at least the first chapter? Oh, excellent. Okay. Hi, Owen. So that's good. We have at least read the first chapter, and so we can move a little bit more smoothly through that. For those of you joining us on Facebook or YouTube, again, we'll be going into pretty good detail throughout this book. And one thing that might be a little tricky is I think we all have different copies, and so when I will try and do where we are in the book rather than specific page numbers, because Kindle and hard copy tend to be way off in the numbering, but we'll do our best. So this is going to be a very conversational class, and go ahead and unmute yourselves because there are few enough of us that I don't feel like we have to line up and raise hands and take turns. When I ask questions of you, just feel free to chime right on in, and if you interrupt somebody else, one of you will wait until it's your turn to talk. But we're all more or less civilized here. I think we can figure that out. So first question for all of you is, this first chapter, is here to set up the family, the Bedloe family. And so it brings us into their home pretty much right off the bat. And I would like to know from all of you who have already read this first chapter, how is it that they set up this family? What kind of family are we dealing with? And go from the very bare bones details to the personalities involved if you'd like. But there's a general aura that Ann Tyler is setting up with the Bedloe family. And I'd love to hear from you all what you think that is. What is she trying to do when she describes this family to us just in this first chapter?
I had a humanities professor that when we would review books, he would take us back to the first paragraph, or the first sentence even. And I did that with this particular book. And there it was. We had this sort of seedy neighborhood, but with an apple pie family right in the midst of it. Is there some music going on?
I think it's somebody's phone.
Okay.
There we go.
This apple pie family, not only that the neighbors think of them as in this way, is that the family itself thinks of it this way. I read a review of something a couple of days ago, and this reviewer was talking about life and family in this way, and he said, when you think of a pinball machine, the ball goes down and it hits an obstruction. And once it does that, everything changes. And it's unexpected and you move on. And then it continues going like that. And so that sort of set up the story for me. When I went back, I began to understand much better what she was talking about. And I began to realize just how much effort she really put into those first couple of pages.
Yeah, thank you, Don. I really love that pinball machine analogy, and with this book in particular, and with the personality of the family, I think that's very suitable for this. And now that I have said, everybody take yourselves off of mute, I'm recanting because sometimes there's background noise. So if you have something to say, unmute yourselves. In the meantime, mute yourselves so that we don't have too much background noise. I'm sorry to keep switching up like that, but I want to make sure everybody is heard and well heard. So that being said, and thank you, Don, for that. And what Don pointed out was this starts off in, it's not a bad neighborhood, but it's a comfortable, well lived in, little bit seedy neighborhood and a small street. She makes it very clear. That's right, Don. And I really like what your humanities professor told you too. Just from that first paragraph, we glean so much information about what we're about to deal with. The first thing she says is everybody knew everybody else. And so even outside of the family, the biological family circle, you've got a neighborhood family, which is something to be desired, I think, in our neighborhoods. One block, and they all have their set roles to play in this little teeny tiny microcosm of a street where they all live. So thank you for that rich paragraph that you just gave us, Don. Anyone else want to add anything about the Bedloe family and the impressions that you got, how Anna is setting us up with this family? Mary. Now you're muted. You were unmuted. There you go.
I'm not good at this side of things. She sets it up fairly early in one of the first few pages that all the Bedloes believed they were wonderful, or believed that their family was wonderful. And this is the second time I'd read this, but even the first time I read it, I had the feeling, well, that's going to change or it wouldn't be a book. So I think it's just, I love the way Tyler works to give an impression and then chip away at it little by little, through the entire course of the book because if they were perfect and everything about them was fine, it would not be true to life and it would be boring. So the more she reveals to us, the more, problems we see, or more sort of wrinkles we see in their perfection. And yet that is what makes it more real.
Yeah.
So.
And I like the sculptor analogy, Mary, because when you think of being chipped away at, at first, that doesn't have a very positive connotation. But when you see a sculptor at work, what they start with is this perfect, smooth, polished block of marble or stone or whatever, and then they chip away to reveal something that was truly in there all along, that hopefully is pleasing to the eye, or at least instructional or worth seeing, right? And so that was a really good analogy to use. Thank you for that. Anything else about the family as a whole before we go a little bit more into detail? Just first impressions that we'd like to share.
Well, I thought that the neighborhood was very similar to my neighborhood, and that it's very diverse, and you know what's going on with other people. And, you know, even though your family is normal, you know, you see other things going on with other things. And it just brought to my knowledge that neighborhoods are neighborhoods, and we have to accept people no matter what nationality, no matter what background they have. And that's what my neighborhood is like.
Oh, I'm glad to hear it. Yeah, she talks about the house that's always being rented out by foreigners. Most of them, that comes up later in the book, most of them are students at Johns Hopkins. They're medical interns that are coming here for school. And the way she works with them later in the book is really fantastic if you haven't gotten there yet. But their stories end up playing into all of this as well. And while we're here, I feel bad for not having done this right when we started. I think most of us know each other, but not everyone might know my friend Lynn Susan up in the, well, I don't know what your page looks like, but hi, Lynn Susan. Lynn Susan's a local artist. She has come to church several times and worked with us on quite a few things, but she's a wonderful addition to this class, and I'm glad you're here. Lynn Susan, meet everybody. Everybody meet Lynn Susan. Okay.
Hi, everybody.
And you looked as though you might be heading for your microphone to say something earlier. Do you have something to share?
Well, I just wanted to say that I thought that it was interesting that everybody in the family had a particular role to play, and they all knew what their role was.
Ooh,
and
yeah.
They kind of lived their life according to that, with whatever the expectations were. That was how they lived their life. Like the sister got married right away, and Ian knew what his role was in high school. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was interesting that it was set in the late 60s, early 70s, when things were just starting to change socially. So I thought it was interesting that they all knew who they were at that particular time at the introduction.
Yes, and going back to what Mary said, that leaves it rife for change. But it's funny to me when you talk about the roles. Who here feels as though they have a role in their family of origin that they played out and still play out sometimes for a very long time? Anyone? And I know that, having lived away from my family for many years now, I know that when I walk through the front door of my parents' house, there I am right where I was 40 years ago, with the same, slightly changed, but mostly the same expectations that I did when I was the littlest one, and, you know, and my sisters fall into their roles and my parents fall into their roles. It is inescapable. And sometimes that's a good thing, and sometimes it can dog your heels a little. But that's a great point, Lynn Susan, about the identity that is attached to us as a member of a family, whether we know it or not. The Bedlows are lucky, I guess, in some ways, that they seem to realize the roles that they're filling in their family. But as we go through the book, we'll see how that's going to change. One of the things I wanted to ask us about, because this is very important in the trajectory of the book, what does it mention, if anything, about their practice of faith, or about any religious inclinations they have? Anyone, just this first chapter, anyone remember anything that it said about church or faith or religion or anything?
Occasional.
Occasional.
I think that's right. Holidays.
Yes, it doesn't come right out and say it, but when Danny and Lucy are married, it says, so they're married a week after the family meets Lucy for the first time, right? They have had this whirlwind courtship where scrappy, spunky Lucy walks into the post office with this huge box of belongings that's all getting mailed back to her ex-husband, including a bowling ball and a bowling trophy and all of these things. She's obviously cleaning house after a separation and divorce. They've met, the parents just meet her, and a week later they're getting married, it says, in a Presbyterian church that the Bedloes sporadically attended. So in the beginning of this book, Ian, who's going to be the one I think who we get to see the most of in this book, Ian has very little registry with any of the religious stuff that's going on. He's more concerned about his girlfriend sitting next to him and does he get to be with her alone afterwards than the setting of the church and the marriage itself. So that is going to be really important for us to remember as we continue moving through the book, because in the beginning of all this, we talk about roles that change throughout the story. In the beginning of this, there's really very little identification with church or spirituality or anything. It's just one of those things. And if we know the Bedloes, and I feel as though after this first chapter, we kind of do, you would think they're probably the kind of people that go to church because that's what you're supposed to do. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I wish more people felt like that, quite frankly, but it's something, well, it's Christmas and that means we go to church, or it's Easter and that means we go to church, or somebody's getting married or somebody has died. And so these are things that take place in the context of a church. That's going to be really, really important for us to watch as we keep going. So now that we've kind of covered the family in a wider net, let's look at Ian specifically, because as I said, he's the one from whom we're most likely to see the deepest and most numerous changes in all of this. So when we look at Ian, and it's already been pointed out that the whole family thinks that they're all wonderful. They all think that they and each other are just wonderful. For Ian in particular, do we have a sense of how he fits into that family unit, about how he feels about his own family? Any keys or clues as to how Ian might feel?
Well, he admires his older brother, for one thing.
Oh, yes, he does. Very much. Okay. That's one. Mary?
I also get the sense, particularly at the beginning, that he is, as he moves into adolescence, he's starting to view his family from a little bit of a remove. It says he's imagining a biographer narrating his life. And so you get the sense that he is not accepting the things the way he did when he was a child. He has a relationship with a girlfriend, so he's moving outside of the family unit to develop this, close relationship with someone outside of his family. But he's sort of at that sort of cusp period where he's still fully in the family, but starting to turn into an adult. So it's a time of great change, and you can sense his relationship with his family changing as part of that.
Yep, thank you. Anything else about Ian?
Well, I get that he's the youngest, and so he's never had to be the one that they look to for anything. Before this.
That's right. And that is also going to be very, very important, because while they've never had to look to him for any kind of support or guidance or really anything, because he's the youngest, even though he eventually turns into someone on whom you can depend and rely and who takes on a lot of responsibility, it's hard for them to see him that way for a long time, even though he shows himself capable over and over and over again. Just like Lynn Susan was talking
He's
about.
still the baby.
Yeah, that's right. He's still the baby. And so it's hard for them to not because they don't trust him, not because they don't think he's wonderful, but because for so long he's been in the role where he doesn't have to do that. And so it's going to be challenging should something happen where he has to take on a great deal of responsibility. Should that happen, it's going to be hard for them to see him that way. And I will tell you that my parents and my sisters, I'm also the youngest in my family. It's not that they don't believe me that I'm a priest and that I help in the leadership of a church, but it's still kind of like, oh, that's just so weird. She's just a baby, right? And so for those of you who have those, who have older or younger siblings, if you're the older sibling, people might be looking to you and think, well, why doesn't so-and-so take on more responsibility? Because she's the oldest and she should be the responsible one. Or to look at the youngest and say, well, why isn't he? Why is he doing all of this? Doesn't he know that we'll take care of him? So very, very interesting about that, Carol. Thank you for pointing that out. One of the things that Mary mentioned is this little section in the beginning where it talks, where she writes about how it's like he has his own little narrator going through his head all throughout the day, as though he's in a documentary or a movie about his own life, minute by minute. And it says, I'm just going to quote the whole thing to you. It says, even so, there were moments when he believed that someday, somehow, he was going to end up famous. Famous for what, he couldn't quite say. But he'd be walking up the back steps or something, and all at once, he would imagine a camera zooming in on him, filming his life story. He imagined the level, cultured voice of his biographer saying, Ian climbed the steps. He opened the door. He entered the kitchen. Have a good day, hon? His mother asked, passing through with a laundry basket. Oh, he said, the usual run of scholastic triumphs and athletic glories, and he set his books on the table. His biographer said, he set his books on the table. And I'm doing my best Morgan Freeman impression there. I know it's not very good. But when I read that for the first time, this huge sense of relief washed over me, because I read that and I thought, oh, thank goodness I am not the only one who has that silly habit. More so when I was younger, but even now, sometimes you narrate your own life for no apparent reason, except for that maybe you read too much. That's what I attribute it to in my own life. I just read too much, and so I have to narrate constantly what's going on. But I love that part. So he is self-aware to the point that a teenage boy can be self-aware. Self-aware without a great deal of self-examination. And that's not just true for teenagers, and it's not true just for boys. I know lots and lots of people who are very aware of the space they occupy without necessarily doing a lot of self-examination to go along with it. And that can be a blessing, and it can also be a curse, as we'll find out later. How does Ian feel about kids in this first chapter? You're all on mute, so if you have something to say about that, go ahead and unmute yourselves. How does Ian feel about children in this first chapter of the book? I see Mary frantically looking something up. Todd, do you want to say something?
I think he was a little bit indifferent,
Okay.
if I remember correctly.
A little indifferent. That's one facet. Anything else? When he is babysitting Lucy's two children from her previous marriage, when he's babysitting Thomas and Agatha, what is his, he's good with them, right? He doesn't ignore them. He plays games with them. He reads to them. He does all this stuff. But in general, what's his general, do we think his general attitude towards children?
I was just going to say he's not a fan.
You're bored by the whole thing.
Okay, you chimed in on each other, saying more or less the same thing. Beth says he's not a fan. Don says he's bored by the whole thing. He does not want to have his life revolve around kids. And in fact, in the latter part of this first chapter, he's very angry. And I, quite frankly, I would be too, because his mother, not knowing the very important life-changing plans he has with his girlfriend that night, his mother sort of volunteers him to babysit for Danny and Lucy, which is a decision that turns out to have multiple wide-reaching, farther than anybody could possibly know, consequences. But in general, when we start this book, Ian is not really going to dedicate himself to a life of caring for children. That is not where we start the book. And so that's going to be really important for us as well when we continue on in the book. I want to look at a couple of specific points in the book. We've already kind of talked about the Bedloe family's identity. And one of the things it says in the beginning, in these first few paragraphs, as Don was pointing out, is it establishes them not just as a family, but the family. You don't think of them as separate units, not just 5 individual people living in a house together, doing their own thing. It's not just the Bedloes, it is the Bedloe family. They are held up for the whole neighborhood, that whole block of people. They're held up as a paragon of what the family should be. The mom and dad are nice and friendly and easygoing, and they know everybody and are sociable. The daughter had this brilliant career ahead of her, but she decided to get married instead, and she's having so many babies that they're named by the alphabet. and the mother, B, Bedloe, the mother, makes jokes about how once they get all the way from A through Z, they're going to have to start doing double consonants or double letters like they do in the big catalogs with all these different things on one page. And they always make the best of these things. But they're the quintessential American family. And so that's important. One of the other things that I wanted to point out was the first encounter that they have with Lucy. Danny brings Lucy home, and for all they know, they think that he is just introducing them to some girl he's dated. And they make it clear, and Tyler makes it clear in the book, that he's dated lots of girls, but what's always happening with Danny and his girlfriends? Anyone remember or can speak to that? When Danny is dating a girl, what tends to happen, or what actually has happened pretty much every time so far in his relationships?
I think they're kind of taking advantage of him.
That's right.
And I just had something to mention too about the mother volunteering Ian to babysit. My thought when I read that was she knew something was up and purposely did that, even though the book doesn't say that. I'm just wondering, because as a mom of a teenager, if I knew, okay, those folks are going out of town, no, we're putting a stop to that. So she doesn't say that, but I'm just wondering if maybe there was a backstory to that. Maybe it comes up later. I've only read like the first chapter, but.
No, I'm glad you brought that up. I am not a parent. And so it never would have crossed my mind that B had a little something in her head saying, you better send that boy away.
Well, that's why I like this book, even though I've only read the first chapter. It's one of those books where they don't explain everything. And it makes it so interesting. You try to get into the heads of each character, and it's kind of cool to try to figure them all out.
Well, I want you to revisit that idea in a couple of chapters and see if it sticks.
Okay.
Because I'm curious to know what you think. So back to the previous question, Erin is right. Every relationship that Danny has had so far, he always feels as though in the end, he's been taken advantage of. And he probably has been. Danny is not a harsh guy in any way. He is affable and easygoing. And as Ian points out, unfortunately, later, he actually does get snowed in, just not the way that Ian thought he did. So Danny is then presented. That's one of those show me, don't tell me things that Ann Tyler is really, really good at. She establishes without ever coming out and saying, Danny was a vulnerable man and prone to being taken advantage of. She doesn't say that, but we hear just in little traces how that's made itself known in the past. So we can understand why Danny's family didn't necessarily think this was some earth-shattering introduction that everybody was about to get. But how does he introduce her? He says, I want you to meet Lucy. And he says, who is she?
The woman who changed his life.
The woman who changed my life. This is going to keep coming up. This phrase about her, spoken in Danny's words, is going to keep echoing throughout the book. It gives me goosebumps just to think about it. She will change his life. She's going to change everybody's life. But we'll get into that. Mary, I see that you're off mute. Do you have something to add?
No.
Okay. So when he brings her home and they're expecting, oh, here's some, the next one in a series of girls who's going to break our poor Danny's heart. Instead, he introduces her as the woman who's changed my life. And they're, of course, being this very positive, upbeat family. Oh, how wonderful. And they hug her and they embrace her and they bring her in. So she starts telling the story, or Danny starts telling the story of how he's working in the post office, and she, little plucky tiny thing, brings in this 28-pound box of stuff, and he's explaining it to them, and they're listening and they're paying attention, and Doug and Bea and Ian are all listening to how this is going down. And she says, I wanted to send this to my ex-husband. And it says this little jolt passes through the room. Now remember, this is taking place in 1965, which is not that long ago, but long enough ago to where that would have been way out of the norm. And then the next sentence out of her mouth is, it's going to be so expensive. Think of all the groceries this would buy, or stuff for the children. And everybody, and there's this other little moment, because not only is she a divorced woman, she's a divorced single mother. And in that day and age, that is something that is very unusual. I don't know why it was that way, but it was that way. And so there's this adjustment that over the course of the conversation that has to take place in the minds of the other Bedloes. So what do we do when things are not as we expect? If somebody that you love and respect and want the best for, which is certainly how they feel about Danny, if somebody that you love and hope for the best for and expect good things from comes to you with a situation that initially seems, oh, this is wonderful, this person whom I love has found something wonderful for themselves, and then you find out something about it that says, oh, well, that's not exactly what I thought they were presenting to me. And then you find out another thing, or maybe another couple of things where you think, oh, this is not at all what I thought they were coming here with. For ourselves, what is our reaction when somebody for whom we want the best comes to us with something that makes us worry?
It's a frozen smile. I thought that was the funniest things in the book. Those frozen smiles I'll never forget.
Yes. Yep. They're not sure how to. Now they don't react badly. They don't ask for an explanation. They don't kick her out. They don't manifest any of their disappointment. But the way that she writes it, you can tell that at best they're taken aback. So how is it that we react when somebody, for most of us, I suppose it would be a child or maybe a sibling or even a parent, somebody that you love and want the best for, when they say, Mom, I've got the best news. I got a new job. Oh, that's wonderful. And then they tell you about the job and it's not something that you had hoped for, or they tell you about the new relationship and it's not something that you would have envisioned for them. How do we tend to react when those things happen for the people that we love?
Well, I've been through that. And what you do is you wait and see how things develop. And then you get to meet the person. I mean, this happened with my daughter, but the problem was that other people would say bad things about this person. And so you would kind of defend that person and find out that that person really wasn't what they were thinking, only because people thought that she should have somebody upper class, you might say. But it turned out to be fine. I mean, sure, my daughter passed away, but if she were still here, I think things would have worked out.
Thank you, Brenda.
You know, the amazing thing is how smoothly all of this goes on, even though they have the concerns that they have. The family accepts it all, because at this point, I still think they think they're the perfect family and things will somehow work out. I can't think of it any other way.
That's right. And there are those that would think that they were fooling themselves. I don't fall into that camp. I think, I mean, I don't know that I would say I'm a believer in the power of positive thinking as that movement went some years ago, but I do think we set ourselves up to be in certain mindsets. You know what I mean? And when towards the end of that meeting, when they've gone off to dinner and Doug and B and Ian are rattling around in the house, kind of processing all this, Ian is thinking, how is it that his family is able to transform things so seamlessly? And as he is thinking this is what happens. Behind him, his mother said, well, we've been wishing for years he'd get married. That's true, we have, his father said. And now that the draft's stepping up, oh yes, the draft, his father said faintly. Did she mention how many children she had? Not that I can recall. If she has lots, B told him, we can mix them in with Claudia's and form our own baseball team. She laughed. Ian turned to look at her, but he was too late. Already she had passed smoothly over to unquestioning delight, and he had missed his chance to see how she did it. I think that's wonderful. I mean, I think that's wonderful, because not only does it make it easier on the other people around you, it makes it easier on you. Not that you should be blind when there is something that you need to address or deal with. But in this case, he loves her. He said so. He's going to marry her. He has said so. She's got this history. She said so. What are you going to do about it? Well, are you going to make a lot more trouble for everybody else in this situation? Or are you going to make things run as smoothly as possible and be happy, or as happy about it as you can be yourself? We all make choices. Anyone else want to address this? Anne.
Earlier on, it said the family, they were not worriers. They just assumed that things would work out for the best. So here's a perfect example of that attitude.
Right. And later on, not too much later on at that in the book, we'll see what happens when an attitude like that runs up against when things work out badly, when things do not go at all the way we want them to go, when in fact things go, in a heartbreaking direction. How then does that attitude hold up when you are faced with tragedy or even disappointment? And so that's going to be really important for us to remember as we move on in the book. When bad things happen to people who have a generally non-worried, always put a positive spin on things, accept what happens and be happy with it, what happens to that attitude and the people that have it when something truly terrible happens to us, right? Okay. One of the other things that I want to talk about here. Okay, so about the middle of the chapter, it talks a lot about Ian and what he does during the summer and how his relationship with his girlfriend is flourishing, with Cicely, his girlfriend, is flourishing, and all of these things where he's starting to realize that he is growing up. And so he's got this job moving at a moving company, and he stops, when he's in the middle of the job, he stops so he can check out his own arm and the muscles that are forming and how he's getting taller and bigger. And then it talks about, what makes somebody grown up. Because he used to think it's when you have deep voices or you start growing a beard if you're a man, or if you start gaining muscle mass, which is what he's doing. And then it says, well, like a lot of other things, muscles had turned out not to be a big deal after all. Now he thought it might be sleeping with a girl that made the difference. But even so, he continued to work at building himself up. He comes home and he's all hot and sweaty and manly, and his mother says, "Ooh, go take a shower, you smell," and he feels even manlier that way. What is it that makes, I think this is a question worth answering, and I wish that we could go back in time a few years and answer it when we were in the midst of growing up and see what we would have answered then compared to what we would answer it tonight. But what makes an adult an adult? At what point do you actually realize that you are an adult, or a grown-up for that matter? Is it muscles? Is it a relationship with somebody? Is it living on your own? What is it that makes an adult an adult? Answer what you might have thought. And for those of you who are watching your families grow up, maybe that would be different when you look at your own children. You might want to wait on what makes an adult when you think about your own children, but answer it for yourself first. Can you remember what you would have said a grown-up is before you were one?
Oh, I actually can't remember that, but Madeline has an interesting theory on this. So she truly does not believe that you can be an actual adult until your parents are no longer with you. So until last September, when my father's father, my grandfather, and their great grandfather passed away, she truly didn't think David, her dedu, was an adult. And everyone else is so sad. Joe passed away. Joe was 98. Trust me, he had been waiting for a long time. But she said to him, Dedu, do you feel different? You're an adult now.
Wow.
And my father, 3 months later, turned 69. So you might have thought he might have encompassed something grown-up-y in the previous years. But according to Madeline, if you have a parent, there's always that sort of fallback and that different situation that the parent enables you to be a different person than if you're truly on your own.
Wow. I'm impressed. I like that. Thank you. Anyone else have any input on what makes an adult an adult? Yes, Mary.
When I was a kid, I think it involved supporting myself and living on, if not just outside of my family home, living by myself. I'll tell you the truth. There are times I don't feel that I've grown up yet. I'm kind of with Madeline that until my father passed away at 101 5 years ago, there were still times I called him with daughter questions. And I think there have been times in my adulthood when I've realized I'm an adult, I can make this decision all by myself. But it was a process. It wasn't a boom. I think when you're a child, you think there's a threshold you're going to cross and you'll be grown up. And I'm still
18th birthday.
Or 21st or whatever, but you think, you're going to be there and then you'll be all done growing up. But
right.
No.
The rest of it's just filler. You're already grown up. You just got to wait it out, right? Okay. Thank you, Mary. Anyone else? Lynn Susan? Oh, I see you, Ed. I'll get you in a minute, Ed. Go ahead, Lynn Susan.
I think that really being adult is when your roles reverse. When you become a caregiver or of your parent, or you are asked to make decisions for them, or, you become someone that they rely on, where in your entire life, you've always relied on them. I lost my mother when I was still in my 30s, and that was a complete turning point for me, but it wasn't the time that I felt that I was an adult. At that time, I was pretty established in a career, and the career that I had, they were kind of relying on me. Well, what should we do in this circumstance? And I had never been asked for advice before when I was a child. So it was, but the roles changed when my mother had cancer, and my father just didn't know how to cope with it. And I was asked to step up. And that was when I started to really, because I didn't have any children. And that was when I started really feeling like an adult, that the roles reversed. And
So you see taking instead of the other way around.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that. Ed, I saw you had your hand up down there.
Yeah, I was just gonna, oh,
Yeah.
Oh, Ed first and then Ann.
oh, Ed, oh, sorry.
Well, Ann, you can go. You want Ann to go? Hey, I want me to go. Okay. Oh, all right. I like what the young lady said about you don't become an adult until after your parents are gone. But I was a father very young, 19 years old, and ended up raising two families at the same time. And I was like, wow, I got to support all these people, be responsible, do a lot of things that were responsible. And I was able to do that. And it was difficult, but I think I did pretty well. At least the kids feel that way, who are now grown, 31, 34, 40, and 41. And I was 19. But what really made me an adult, I think, makes you an adult, is when my mother passed away, my father passed away, all four of my brothers passed away, and it's only my sisters, and I'm the youngest of 10.
Ooh.
So I got probably 64 nieces and nephews and sisters and brothers, and I was the man of the family. So I always felt I had to have an answer. I had to have a solution. I had to fix the one who had this problem, that problem, until I started going to God more and realized that all the answers were God. I could direct you towards the answers, but I used to actually, Reverend Susanna, try to find the solutions. I had to go deep, and I know this and I know that. When I realized I didn't have the answers, now I find myself sending them to you. So trying sending them to your church.
I need an adult. I need an adult.
Because I realize we are all children. In order to enter the heaven, we have to become as children. So I think that child thing stays with you. But being honestly, as a man, I think for men, especially special boys, and I'm not trying to be sexist, but they have to be taught to be responsible, especially for the children that they bring into the world. Like you should pass off your children to your mother, your sister. We see it all the time. I had a good father, and he showed me that. I remember my daughter was born, and I was just turning 20, getting ready to go to Virginia, College of Virginia. And he said, "Boy, you ready to go to work?" I said, "Yeah, Dad, I'm ready to go to work." He said, "You're gonna have to do that for the rest of your life." And he was, it's been rough, but it's been worth it, So I think part of it is realizing that you don't have all the answers. And coming every week, I get more answers. And I'm finding out that I don't have the answer to the answer. What about that?
Those are true words and worthy of all people to be received. And in fact, one of the chapters in this book is called People Who Don't Have All the Answers. So keep that in mind. Anne, what were you going to say?
I was going to say something very pragmatic. In order to be responsible, you have to make money. So for me, you become an adult when you're able to earn your own money so that you have the wherewithal to help others and to help yourself. And also, it gives you certain independence in making decisions about your life.
It can. What cracks me up, I see you, Beth, what cracks me up about that is I think about people who have never had to work a day in their lives because their family provides for them, or they have trust funds or inheritances, or they just come from very wealthy families. And instead of thinking of people who can't find work or who don't work and don't make any money, what I think about is people who have too much of it and never learn how to take responsibility for themselves or for other people. Because we see that in this country, I think. So thank you for that, Anne. Beth?
I was just going to say, when I was 16, I thought turning 1 was going to be 21 and I'll be an adult. But what I found was that
no, it just means 18, you're a drunk adult.
Oh, no, I could drink before that in New Jersey. But I found when my family had to start depending upon me, or when I became responsible for taking care of other people at 18, I think that's when I became an adult. Other people depended on me for different aspects within the family.
I'm hearing a theme emerge in our answers here. Anyone else want to speak to this? Don? Okay.
No, I'm out.
Okay, so what I'm hearing here, and this has shown up in everybody's answers, including Madeline's, when you have to take on different and increased responsibilities, whether it's because the people whom you thought of as your primary caregivers have now gone, or because you're taking care of your own parents, as Lynn Susan points out, or as Ed points out, you know, he was the man of the family at that point. So then he had to take on these new responsibilities. The age has less to do with it, or as Anne pointed out, being able to provide financially and responsibly in that way. The age has less to do with it than the level of responsibility that you take on. So when we see Ian in this first chapter trying to parse this out, is it my muscles? Is it my deeper voice? Is it the job that I have? Is it my girlfriend? He is looking at all of these symbols without seeing what the meaning behind those symbols eventually leads to. And that's what we are all kind of pointing to in our answer of what makes an adult an adult. Just a couple more things here. I want to talk about secrets, because as this chapter moves on, this first chapter moves on, we see the secrets kind of being made and being revealed and being exploded, whether they're the real thing or not. So it starts with Ian's coming home and his parents are not there because his sister is having a little trouble with her pregnancy. So they've gone to be with her. Lucy is there though, with her 2 children, and her kids spill the beans that Lucy is actually pregnant, right? So they're talking about this baby doll that Thomas drags around with him. And remember the baby doll, because she's important too, eventually. But they're talking about how she needs some new clothes. And Mama keeps buying all these new baby clothes, but she won't let the doll wear them because she wants to hang on to them for the real baby. That's the implication. And so there's this moment where, oh, well, that was fast, right? And so this is laid a little secret, and Lucy turns to him and says, don't tell the others. Have you ever shared a secret with somebody and there's this little undercurrent of, I'm not supposed to know this, and I'm not supposed to tell anybody else this, and I have this little thrill from sharing a secret? What happens to a secret once the one person who has it tells it?
It's not a secret.
That's right. So he has this little secret with her, and it gives, like, secrets can give you a false bonding with somebody. If you share a secret with somebody, you might think that your relationship is a little different than it actually is. And Ian starts veering in kind of an uncomfortable direction with his feelings for Lucy. He starts kind of having more of an attraction to her. He's always thought she was pretty, but there's something added to it now. There's another dimension. This secrecy adds a little something naughty into it. As it turns out, she has her baby, and it's a 6-month baby, a 6-7 month baby. And it never crosses anyone's mind. It never crosses Danny's mind or Danny's parents' mind that there's more to this story than perhaps Lucy is letting on. But there's this moment, this sibling moment that I just love, where the eldest sister, Claudia, makes this eye contact with Ian when they bring the baby over for the first time. And he says this message is being communicated to him through Claudia's eyes. This is not a premature baby. And so I don't know how many of you have these wonderful relationships with other people where you can just give a look and it's like spelled out in huge flashing letters what they're thinking. That's a great relationship to have, by the way. It's wonderful when you can speak without words. But in this case, it makes Ian very uncomfortable because he looks again at the baby and he realizes she's right. He doesn't know much about babies, but he knows enough to look at this baby who is apparently 2 months premature. And Claudia, for sure, knows babies. She's got, what are they on, letter F? A, B, C, D, E, F. So they're on their 6th baby. Claudia knows a baby when she sees one. And she is communicating to him, I know what's going on here. And this baby was conceived before they got married and maybe even before they met. So here's another layer of secrecy. Yes, Natalie.
So it looked like B actually realized that though, right? Because she had like a brief moment where she goes, oh, won't the neighbors like tease us? They're going to count on their fingers.
You know, I've thought about that. And I think if she'd really thought anything was funny, she wouldn't have said a word. I think
She
at
would
the
have just
time,
smiled and kept it to herself. Okay.
yeah, I think at the time that would have been common practice, where you look at a couple that's gotten married and you wait and see when they're going to have a baby.
Yeah.
Because if it's 9 months or more, well, then everything is fine and we're in the clear. If not, then that's something for the neighbors to gossip about. Nowadays, not so much. But
Well, it even
50
always used to be like if it was like 8 months and they were sort of bigger, someone would be like, oh, well, we have big babies in my family, or oh, our counting must not be right. And
it's amazing how many premature babies were born so large back in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah. Or that counting when you only need like 10 fingers to figure out that,
Right.
like, you don't have enough fingers to work that one out. Okay.
Right. So this adds another layer of secrecy, because now Claudia and Ian is now becoming the repository of these secrets. And that can weigh on a person. And he's starting to wonder if there aren't other secrets that aren't being revealed to anyone, because Lucy keeps going out on these mysterious social expeditions, but she's coming home with stuff that she didn't start with. Most notably, this fantastic dress. She goes out for a drink with friends or out shopping or whatever. She comes home and she takes off her coat. She's got on this dynamite dress that clearly cost more than she and Danny can afford. And she is so beautiful in it, in fact, that Ian reaches out and touches her on her waist, a very intimate kind of touch, and sort of makes everything very strange. And she, oh, okay, well, here's a 200% tip on your babysitting fees. Bye, go. Hurries him out of there. And so he starts processing, okay, if this baby was actually born on time, then it's not Danny's baby at all. She's a secretive person. She had an ex-husband. She's got these other children. Who really knows where they came from? She's going out on these strange little shopping trips or social trips with her so-called friends and coming back with all of this new stuff that he knows she didn't buy. They can't afford any of this. Rather than thinking anything else, what he thinks is she's going out to meet someone, and this is the father of this new baby. This is Daphne's real father, not Danny. And this is some person who's buying her all of these expensive things, and then she's coming home like nothing ever even happened. So on the night then that he is very angry at being kept from his hot date with his girlfriend who is home alone, and making him this hilariously elaborate dinner. That's great comic relief, by the way. Everything she's making for this fabulous dinner is something stuffed into something else, and she's messing up the gravy, and she's going, and there's all these phone calls back and forth, and he's trying to reassure her he doesn't care about the food, he just wants to be with her, and we all know what that means. But he is stewing, angry, furious, mad that Lucy has gone out to meet her lover, so he thinks, leaving him stranded with these two children and the baby, and no way to get to his girlfriend, who even now her pudding is deflating on the table, and he's worried that he's not going to have some rare special moments with her. And when Danny comes home, it all just explodes. He says, just leave the kids here. We'll only be gone for a few minutes. You take me home right now so that I can get my things and drop me off at Cicely's house. And in the midst of this very tense conversation, he explodes with all of these secrets. He says, that's not your child, and we all know it. He says, what do you think Lucy is doing going out the way that she is? He says, are you blind? Don't you know that she's seeing somebody else? Leaves Danny with this bombshell to go into the house to get his things. And after, in the midst of his being inside the house, Danny rams, apparently, what we see from the end of that chapter, rams the car into the brick wall at the end of their 1-block street. And Ian is left looking in the mirror, knowing that nothing will ever be the same. So it starts, the artistry in this, just the first chapter of this book is really quite something, because it starts off with this very broad stroke sketch of this perfect, wonderful family to whom nothing is so bad that it can't be made better or even made perfect if you work hard enough to make it that way. And here is this woman that we've never seen before, but Danny loves her and he loves her children. And so, all right, We love her too, and she's our family now. And here's this baby that it came a little earlier than anyone would have expected, but she's absolutely beautiful, and now she's a bedlow too, and so we love her also. And then all these secrets start wending their way in and insinuating themselves into their lives. And Ian is keeping secrets of his own. We know why he's going over to Cicely's house for dinner. We know why he has to go to his house first to get the condoms. It says so right there. So he's holding all of these secrets and all of these things, and finally it just builds up until the tragedy that we don't want to happen to this family or to any family explodes everything that was set up in the beginning of this chapter. It's really masterfully done. So that's where we leave them, is what is this? And one of the last questions that I had for you is, in Ephesians 4, it encourages us to speak the truth in love. And the question that I had reading as this book builds up to the climax at the end of the chapter, the question that I have is, should we tell people all the truth all the time? That's a tough question, because we should tell the truth, but what if the truth that we have isn't the truth? We will find out later that the truth that Ian shared with Danny is not the truth, at least not part of it. So Beth, you shook your head very vehemently no. And no, I'm not laughing at you. I agree with you, but I'd like to know your point of view. Should we tell all the truth all the time to all the people? Tell me why
No.
not, Beth?
If it interferes with, okay, if keeping the secret keeps them safe, then I think then sometimes you just have to bite your tongue and let it go.
Okay.
If, keeping the secret puts them in an unsafe place, then I think hopefully somewhat tactfully you have to let them know. And sometimes it's sort of, I'll say a thing. My brother married a woman who was a little wacky, and all of us, all my siblings and I knew that this girl was wacky. And it wasn't until they separated and got divorced and we said to him, we all knew she was wacky. And he's like, why didn't you tell me? And it was like, you know what? You wouldn't have believed us in the beginning. You would never have believed us. So we kept our mouths shut, because if we had said then he would have been angry with us. And it, I think, would have made things worse. And so we zipped it.
Okay. Thank you. Mary?
Sorry. I think a lot of it has to do with intention. I don't believe that it is Ian's intention to tell Danny the truth for Danny's own good. Ian's telling him the truth because he's mad, and because he doesn't, not necessarily even mad at Lucy or at Danny, but at the idea that Danny's having the wool pulled over his eyes. I think he feels that.
And he's also just mad because he wants to go have sex with his girlfriend, and he can't.
I think that's the biggest thing. So I think when we decide about telling the truth, we have to look at our intention. And sometimes it's very hard to look down the road and figure out how things are going to result. I had a situation similar to Beth's. A family member was dating someone who was not good for her. And I thought, if I tell her what I think, it's going to push her the wrong direction, or, it's not my place to tell this person how to live their life. As it turned out, I should have been more straightforward. But if you're thinking lovingly, it can be very hard to judge what degree of truth to use. That's all.
Thank you. Anyone else have anything to say about truth telling? Brenda?
I just found out recently from one of my sisters the truth that happened when I was a young kid. And she told me this, and I don't believe her, because it didn't affect my life. And if I had known earlier, it would have affected my life. And so right now, I don't want it in my life. So I'm just kind of just blocking it out. And you know. So, you know, I have to live my life. So.
Thank you, Brenda.
Mhm.
One of the most common, oh, Carol, go ahead.
I think you have to weigh what purpose it's going to serve. You want somebody to be happy, and so if what you're going to say is going to make them unhappy, is it worth? What's the harm in not saying it and letting them live in the dream world that they're in?
And yeah, okay.
Sort of. I didn't say it very well, but you know, why burst their bubble if there's no good reason to do that? If they're happy, let them.
Okay.
But if it's going to be harmful, if there's really going to be harm, then you have to tell them. Kind of like what Beth said.
When people join 12-step programs, one of the rules, that you go by is going to people whom you have hurt and making amends. And one of the trickiest things that comes up for people, especially when they're dealing with substance abuse and they've behaved in ways that are a betrayal to someone that they're married to or that they're in a relationship with. One of the most common questions that comes up for people in 12-step programs when they come to the point where they're making amends for things that they have done wrong is, you know, I was a substance abuser, I cheated on my spouse. In order to make amends, do I need to tell them? Do I need to confess that to them? Is that the amendment? And then go on. And usually the answer is no, you do not do that, because confession will make you feel better, but it will make the other person feel worse. And so the amendment is you tell yourself, you write it down, you do something to where you say, yes, I did this. I know that I did it. It was wrong and I am sorry for it. But the act of amendment lies in how you carry on your relationship with that person from that time forward, not making yourself feel better by making a confession that that other person doesn't need to hear. So truth, you got to tell the truth, but you have to be mindful of the truth that you are telling and for what purpose. As Mary says, what's your motivation for doing it? Ed, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I did, Reverend
I see
Susanna.
you, Ed.
Thank you so much. You hear me?
Yes.
Thank you so much. I can only see my mic sometimes. This is very, very, very close to my heart. Having been involved with various 12-step programs for over 30 years, it's called the 8th step. We made direct amends to people whom we had harmed. But before the 8th step, there's a 7th step that says you make a list first. So let's just say you were alcoholic. You cheated on your wife and say you stole $500 from Reverend Susanna, right?
I'd like to know where you found it.
And years later, you become a productive member of society, an esteemed member of the church, and you donate $50,000 to the church, right? Now, you made a list of the fact that you were a thief. You changed your behavior, you redeemed, and you, first of all, when you make this list, they say you have to make this list to God, to yourself, and another human being, because you have to get rid of the guilt. And the way you have to do it, first admitting that you did it, to accepting it with self-acceptance, admitting it to God. But that's why they give you a sponsor, because when you admit it to another human being, it takes away the arrogance and the denial that you let it happen. But once you change your behaviors, all of us are going to have sins, and many of us have skeletons in our closet. If you change your behavior and you truly make amends, just like when you tell the parables of Jesus, oftentimes the sinner or the woman, he would tell them, you know, just go and sin no more. You know, I'm not saying you should get away with everything, but I've seen people who have made an 8-step list and it turned out horrible, but they didn't know the timing. They didn't know the reason. Some stuff is petty. I mean, if somebody stole $50 from me, just too bad. I lost $50. If they changed and they went to a rehab and they got themselves together and they're no longer a prostitute or a thief or whatever, I'm cool with that. I'm not going to try to be self-righteous to make everybody be perfect, because I'm not perfect. But the idea of it is to start to come and clean yourself up. That's what making the amends is for. So once you have it in your heart, that's halfway there, right? Making the list and trying to change. That's the biggest thing. Change. I just wanted to share my experience with that little thing.
Thank you, Ed. Anne?
Yeah, I wanted to say something about truth itself. So in the story, for example, Ian assumes an awful lot of things. He has no proof of any of this. This is just an idea in his head. So I think that you need to be very careful, making a difference between, you know, I'm worried about something, I don't know what it means, and you can share your concern without making it a statement of fact, as if you were a detective and already had the photographs there. So I think that's an important thing also.
Absolutely.
That goes hand in hand with the motivation. Like, why are you saying it? Another possibility that I have experienced is asking the person if they want to know something that you may know. And that's, I have found a very good result with that.
That's good. Yeah.
So I think it is very important how you finesse it. And so in a manner that shows you're going into this very uncomfortable, awkward situation out of love and concern, but you admit, I could be wrong, or I'm not the absolute source, because there's always that possibility. So I think I would just, if somebody was asking me for advice, I think there's a lot to think about before you would go forward with whatever it is.
And we'll see again the trajectory of maturity in the way that we perceive and tell the truth as we go through this book. Chapter 8 is called I Should Never Tell You Anything.